what makes you a good human, and how do we stay, well, I guess my tagline is, how do we stay human in a digital age? What does that even mean? What do you want to have in your life? And to me, that's about really authentically connected. That's about being empathetic. That's about being conscious and being able to feel like you're making choices that are really well informed. So increasingly, my work isn't so much about the digital. It's actually about the humans who are interfacing with the digital. And if you could look up, great name for a podcast.
Thank you.
It would just, that's what makes a difference. And that's where those connections happen.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Look Up Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein. And as always, I just want to start off by thanking you for following along on this journey with me, continuing to grow and improve the shows. I hope you notice, and bringing on such incredible guests. I'm learning so much through this process, and really just am honored that all of you are listening. And so, as always, feel free to reach out to mark@thelookuppodcast.com if you have any questions, guest recommendations, or suggestions for me. So diving into this episode, I had the privilege of chatting with Jocelyn Brewer. Jocelyn is the creator of digital nutrition. She's been exploring the impacts of technology and hyperconnected lifestyles for a decade. She was one of the first speaking about digital wellness almost 10 years ago, and I'm just starting on this journey now. So it was great to chat with her. She's a registered psychologist with the Psychology Board of Australia and part of Australia's first cyber psychology research group. In addition, she has over 13 years of experience in public education as both a teacher and a school counselor. On this episode, she and I discussed digital nutrition and how it is a more holistic approach to technology use than simply labeling technology as addictive. We discussed two different schools of psychology, both cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. That was the first time that I learned about ACT. Since Jocelyn often interacts with kids in a school environment, we focused a lot of our attention on the impact technology is having on what she called Screenagers, and even explored Jocelyn's approach to technology with her 2-year-old daughter. Jocelyn brings a sharp intellect and a light-hearted approach to a serious topic, and I really enjoyed chatting with her. As always, you can find more info on Jocelyn and her work in the show links. Without any further interruption from me, this is Jocelyn Brewer.
So Jocelyn Brewer, thank you so much for coming on the Look Up podcast and joining me here. I feel really lucky to have you.
Thank you.
One initiative I've been trying to do on this show is, I think we need, more women voices, obviously, and the podcast space seems to be dominated by white males. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely want to add as much diversity as possible to this show and kind of buck that trend and hopefully continue to have more women on. I was raised by many women, 3. And so it's super important. Not that, obviously it shouldn't matter, but yeah, obviously your work speaks for itself regardless of gender.
Sure.
So as I've kind of been, first of all, we were introduced by Nir Eyal, who's coming on the show. He spoke extremely highly of you, and he obviously hooked, and now he's got this book Indistractable, and he said that you were one of the kind of early and leading voices in this kind of digital health, digital wellness movement. And I know you describe it a bit differently. You talk about digital nutrition.
Yeah.
Definitely want to dive in there. But for starters, I kind of wanted to just acknowledge that, you've been publicly speaking about, the effect of technology on mental health for almost a decade now. And I wanted to just ask, how has your thinking evolved over the last few years as technology continues to rapidly evolve?
That's a really good question, and it's changing all the time. I guess definitely in the last 18 months to 12 years, I think it's shifted, and the whole conversation worldwide has shifted a lot. But it started off with us talking about kids and technology, so the impacts of one-to-one computing in classrooms, and then obviously the explosion of smartphones. But so it used to be, me talking to parents and talking about all of those issues with relation to the kids. But much more now, when I talk to parents, I'm actually speaking to their own habits and their own kind of sense of being quite overplugged with their devices and their work, not being able to disconnect in the way that we probably did 10 years ago. So the whole narrative about, even the role modelling that parents do has shifted. And the narrative that I've always kind of had was much more about we need to kind of ask questions about what we're doing online rather than have these blanket ideas of screen time. And that's definitely sort of coming through a little bit more. But even when I think about the work that I started off doing about 10 years ago when I was training to be a psychologist, and that's kind of how it all started, I was talking about internet addiction, and I was kind of really okay with some of those terms and the languaging around that, which came kind of directly from Dr. Kimberly Young, who was the person who kind of first coined internet addiction and started talking about that in about 1995. And I actually met her, and she was an incredible woman who actually sadly passed away in March this year. So even the kind of way that we would talk about that, and even the way that she talked about it, that one of the TED Talks she did, she actually talked about digital nutrition, having met me and sort of having some great conversations. So even people like that have shifted the way that they use what I call the A word around our habituation to technology, our obsession, our requirement, our stuckness with it. So I do try and veer away from that word, and we can talk about that later, I guess, if you want to, because I'd love to dive into that.
I'd love to dive into that now because obviously we talked about this. I've had Adam Alter on the show, and he talks he encourages using the A word, using the word addiction and describing these behavioral addictions. And then Nir, who I haven't released the episode yet, it will likely come out in a month. But he and I had a really interesting conversation. It was not expected, where he is adamant that this is not addiction, that we make people victims when we use that word. So I'm curious, what's your take on the A word and what is the proper taxonomy here?
Yeah. So look, it's a tricky question because one, and I've heard Nia speak about this, the podcast with Ezra Klein came out this week, and I was listening to that, and I've heard your episode with Adam. And look, they both have, it's really about how we're approaching it. So for me, I'm a psychologist, and as a psychologist, if I pick up the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, in that there is a section, and it says we basically don't use addiction in this book because there's such a polemic nature. It's such a polemic term. It's laden with so much kind of, I can't remember exactly how they frame it, but basically they say it's laden with lots of difficulty, and we veer away from that. We talk about disorder. And even with gaming disorder that's come out with the World Health Classification, the World Health Organization's ICD-11, they're not using addiction there either. So my take is that it's a salacious word that sells, and it does kind of victimize people. I think it's really tricky to then use the drug analogy too. And I don't think, the general population is literate enough to understand the difference between behavioral addictions or process addictions and then substance use disorder. So it sounds really like druggy and junky kind of stuff. And I think that's really problematic. We know the narrative about the war on drugs and the way we polemicize people who do choose to use drugs in a really negative way. And when we're talking about devices that parents hand out to their kids and platforms that parents allow their kids to use, I get really creeped out by the idea that you're calling your kid an addict when if they're an addict, then you've bought them the drug. It just doesn't sit very well with me in terms of kids and technology. What I do say, though, is that devices are more like a syringe. If we have to use this drug analogy, and it's, again, really salacious and it's gets lots of clicks on headlines and things like that, is technology is much more like a syringe. And whether you use heroin or insulin or you vaccinate your child is the difference as to what kind of impact that particular thing is going to have. And I will not ramble too much about that because they're long and complex kind of issues around drug use and addiction and how that shows up from a clinical perspective versus how we just use it in the kind of everyday parlance. And that's obviously crept into, I'm so addicted to anything that is a bit of a guilty pleasure. I think we've got better words and we're clever enough as humans to describe our experiences a lot better than using that particular word.
Yeah, and addiction makes it sound like we don't have agency over our own behaviors, whereas habituation or habit forming behavior allows us to kind of take control.
Yeah,
I guess.
And with some kids, playing Fortnite, for instance, they're highly engaged. Many kids, aren't necessarily addicted. Do they have a tantrum when they are told to stop playing Fortnite? Yeah, some of them. Just like we would, not necessarily like it if somebody came and took a plate of dessert away from us in the middle of eating it. So, I think, it just gets really tricky, especially when we're talking about, young people. There's a whole, scope of different words. Yes, obsessed, and maybe being obsessed with something isn't necessarily healthy. The bigger question is around the context, around what are you doing with the other 23 hours of your day or whatever it is.
So it's a much more nuanced conversation than, this tech bad. And, and I guess that's why I'm continuing to speak to people like you, is because I'm kind of discovering as I move down this process, the nuance of it all. And that's why, so you mentioned this analogy of a syringe, and it's really about what you put inside of the syringe. So maybe the applications that you're using or the games that you're playing as a child, young person or as an adult. I think you kind of coined the term digital nutrition. And, what you just said reminds me of it. So why don't you discuss that in a little more detail, and maybe we can identify the different types of tech as nutrition and kind of what the impact is on our mental health.
Yeah. So, look, I really started talking about this as a response to the rise of people talking about digital detoxing, and that didn't sit kind of well with me, or going on a digital diet, again, from the context of young people, but also just in general, that tech in itself isn't toxic. And some people would say, yes, it is. It's designed pervasively to make you addicted and spend time and all of that. I guess I was.
Well, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
That for me is the challenge, because it feels to me still, as I have these conversations, Near talks about and I'm sorry to interrupt, but Near talks about television and, when the printing press came out, people were quote unquote considered addicted to reading books and, every new step in technology. But it just feels like this is slightly different, only because of the way that our information is used in a constant feedback loop to make sure that we're taking certain behaviors, whether it be voting for a certain candidate, as I think this new documentary on Netflix showed with The Great Hack, or buying that new digital item. And so it feels a little bit more, I guess, so use the word salacious, it feels a little more dangerous than other media.
And I think it's more immersive too. So it's colonized our life in a way that maybe books haven't, or, technology didn't. If you just look at the rate of adoption of things like TV, it took, I'm going to get this figure wrong, but decades, let's say 40 years, for 50 million people to get TV. How long did it take Fortnite to get to 50 million people? Actually, Google couldn't tell me this, so I tweeted Tim Sweeney and he told me it took 6 months. I was really devastated because I was really hoping Fortnite took 14 days. It took 6 months.
That's for 50 million players.
For 50 million players, whereas something like Pokemon Go took 19 days. So the rapidity of our adoption of technology is really, really quick, and ultimately our brain is an ancient brain. We've got a really old operating system in there. So the amount of information that we're consuming, and definitely what we know about cognitive load, is that we're just maxing out on information pretty much before we've even gotten out of bed compared to the kind of information that people would have been consuming, 200 years ago. And obviously,
Someone used the analogy of going on your phone first thing in the morning and checking your messages as, would you allow 100 people to walk into your bedroom first thing in the morning?
Yeah.
So why are you letting 100 people into your mind first thing in the morning?
And I really like the saying that getting information off the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. That, just trying to find what you want and having quality of what you want, you just get smashed in the face. So, so I guess back to the whole digital nutrition question. Yeah, is tech toxic? I'll kind of put that on the shelf over there. And
yeah, absolutely.
I was just kind of feeling like, what does a detox do? Like, you basically tell everyone that you're not going to be on social media for the weekend because you're doing some sort of virtuous thing. And then you come back and you kind of just binge on everything that you've missed out on. So it's kind of like doing a juice cleanse when you're like angry for 3 days and then you come back and you eat a hamburger and you're like, yeah. This kind of binge and purge thing didn't sound to me like it was going to work from everything I knew about kind of behavior change. And I got to thinking about, what if we created healthy habits, not restrictions, where we had better guidelines and principles for what is using technology in a way that maintains your control and your efficacy but amplifies the best bits. What would that be like? And increasingly, I guess the answer to that question is working out where technology supplements your life in positive ways. So how does it help with making life more productive or connecting face-to-face work? And what are the parts of your life that it's creeping into in ways that are creepy? So it used to be much more just about habits, and now it's like about everything. So it's about the ethics of tech design. It's about, whether or not things are addictive and how they're designed, and what do we do with this World Health Organization diagnosis, and where does e-safety fit into all of that? It's kind of become synonymous with digital hygiene, digital citizenship, or digital literacy. All of those kinds of things are actually, I guess, part of my brand in digital nutrition. Yeah.
And I guess just like, what are kind of the categories of nutrition? What are the
virtual vitamins?
Yeah, what are I love that. What are the virtual vitamins, that you're getting, and kind of like, how do you categorize them? And is there almost like a unique diet for each individual?
Yeah.
Or is there kind of like a broad base, like the food pyramid, which people used to think was the appropriate, I guess diet for everyone?
Yeah. I haven't gotten too specific with that. And there's a few, people out there who kind of try and say you should only have a few serves of social media a day. No one can tell me what a serving size is. A lot of it does come back down to time that you spend online, because obviously time is a really easy metric to measure, and it's limited. So we all only have 24 hours in a day. If you are spending, and as humanity is spending more and more time on their phone year in, year out, something has to be shrinking. And even though some people might say, well, I do all of my, scrolling on public transport, or I think a lot of people do a lot of scrolling in the bathroom. That's just probably the evolution of reading on the toilet, right?
I've spoken about that a few times, actually.
Multitasking, right? I always do a thing in my student presentations.
Are you using the bathroom, or are you on your phone?
Is this a good use of time or a bad use of time? Is this a good way of multitasking, or do we really need to monotask? Like in terms of virtual vitamins, I talk about the idea that play is one of the macronutrients, kind of like protein. So the building block to one of the things that you might be doing online that's really great is playing and being playful and engaging in play-based learning. So that kind of encapsulates a lot of the kinds of games and that sometimes we can play. And obviously there are some people who have a lot of play in their digital diet and maybe not enough green veggies because they're gaming, you know, as a central part. And gaming, again, I would say, you know, even within proteins, there's legumes, there's, you know, animal protein. There's lots of different ways to get protein in your diet. It doesn't have to be a you know, R-rated big name title. And in fact, I did a little TEDx talk where I would propose that a digital superfood would actually be an alternative or indie game, a pro-social kind of game that somewhere like Games for Change, which have about 170 or so different games on their website, those kind of games are maybe the superfoods or the types of protein that we could be engaging young people in more, rather than just the multi-billion-dollar games that, you know, are super popular but maybe not that nutritious. Depends how you play, right? I think there's lots of things that are great about something like Fortnite in that you can have a 20-minute battle and then it's not an immersive world or persistent world. It's definitely immersive. It's not a persistent world where the game is continuing even if you're not there, and that kind of creates, you know, FOMO around things like that. So Minecraft, for instance, can be persistent.
Or World of Warcraft.
Yeah, absolutely, those kinds of games. So, you know, like lots of people have lots of problems with Fortnite. I think that we can hack a lot of these games to play them well. So and play in nutritious ways. I always want to, like, I was a geography teacher and a commerce teacher, but I wanted to take people on Grand Theft Auto, like get kids to play Grand Theft Auto where you didn't have to like actually do any of the nasty stuff, but just like hail a cab, take a ride to Manhattan Beach and hang out. Because there's a really great salad bar at Manhattan Beach. I went to Coachella in like 2008 and I hung out with some friends there. And I just remember these amazing salads at Manhattan Beach. So I'm like, we could do a geography excursion of going to LA without even having to go to LA, just by playing Grand Theft Auto, but not playing by the rules of how you get lots of points in that game. So, yeah, there's lots of ways you can mess with games.
Got it. And outside of gaming, kind of what other online activities are nutritious or necessarily bad for your health? Or is it even that they're not? It's just a matter of the dosage, as we kind of said, or the size.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's about breaking down what the activities are, but also breaking down what the cognitions are, right? So two different people can eat a hamburger. One person can hate themselves and feel really guilty. The other person can completely own it. Similarly, you can get two people to, you know, scroll through Instagram or a particular hashtag. Some will have particular kind of digital literacy or self-esteem or different cognitive and emotional skills to be able to read that stream and kind of go, yeah, that's pretty, but I know it's not real life, or I'm not going to buy into a narrative of, you know, compare and despair. Whereas other people might be more predisposed and more vulnerable to some of those messages. So it's definitely the bigger context of the skills that you bring, and maybe the allergies or the sensitivities that you might have to particular messages or particular types of media, digital media. You know, I ask questions about are virtual vitamins things like vitamin E for empathy? Are the kinds of activities that you're engaging with helping you build empathy, build perspective, and understand other human beings' experiences? Or is it actually reinforcing your kind of echo chamber and taking you further away from a variety of perspectives? So that's definitely something that we talk about with young people, like, oh, they're all really narcissistic and they're not having empathy for other people. Well, maybe there are ways that we can actually insert some of that empathy into the kinds of messages that are out there.
Yeah, and that's something that I think about as tech continues to merge with the human. There's a gentleman named Brian Johnson in Los Angeles who's creating a company called Kernel, which is a human brain computer interface similar to Elon Musk's Neuralink. And I think he's actually focused on empathy. Enhancing empathy. I don't know. They haven't released a commercially viable product. They haven't done too much public speaking on the matter, but, you know, it's interesting to think about what values what traits we could insert into technology as man and machine merge that will help us progress as a species or as a society rather than kind of digress or not digress or kind of devolve into this kind of angry mob of separateness. So empathy is a really interesting one. So you're a psychologist and you work with teenagers or screenagers and others, and just as mental health, I worked with a cognitive behavioral therapist when I was in high school. He was the school therapist. His name was Dr. Sefik. Shout out to Sefik. I was one of those overachievers that was applying to the Ivy League schools and kind of freaking out, and he ran these groups for those kids like that were slipping through the cracks because there had been a suicide at my school previously. Wow. As that's prevalent in the Valley now amongst teenagers.
Well, and Australia has a mental health crisis around youth suicide, and the highest rates in the world, and it's gone back up, unfortunately. So we are definitely in a big space around that.
What do you think about that? I mean, what would you attribute technology and the emergence of kind of social to? You're shaking your head no now as a contributor, so you don't believe that that's contributing. What do you think is at the heart of this crisis?
It's such a massive question. What we know is that there's no causal link, and the ability, I guess, for us to track what leads to completed suicide is very, very difficult. So what is, I guess, maybe an easier answer to a question to answer and to not sidestep that is what is creating the mental health crisis in young people, and how do we arrest that? Because many of the kids who are reporting, depression and anxiety and all of those kinds of issues, there's lots that we can do from an early intervention perspective, and from continuing the conversation that we've started around building mental health literacy. So one of the reasons, I guess, is we talk about it more. I saw a meme the other day where it was like, boomers are like, oh, it's therapy, like really don't talk about it. And millennials and young people are like, let me tell you what my therapist told me today. Like, it's very open, that whole conversation. Right? So, which is fantastic. There's still some schools where me as the school counsellor rocks in and it's like, oh, no one wants to be seen to be going there because you must be crazy. So there's still a lot of work to do around that. But I think partly because we're having the conversations, we're more aware of it. We're asking more questions. We're doing, we can kind of almost self-diagnose, or parents kind of pick up on what their kids need much more. I think, again, to use a meme sort of analogy, is there's that great meme that says, young people are more depressed than ever. We must find out why. And the kids say, well, there's a climate crisis. There are all these problems in the world. There's basically a megalomaniac running one of the biggest Western democracies. Yeah. There's a lot of shit going down here. And adults are like, yeah, it's the iPhones, isn't it? And there is a book basically that is all about how all of these statistics that, young people aren't drinking, smoking, having sex, they're not going to parties, all the things that we spent pretty much the 80s and 90s trying to get kids not to do, right? Yeah. And then they're not doing it. And now we're freaking out because they're choosing to be on their phones instead. And even when you look at, for instance, Sydney has gone through this massive development of pretty much all through, there's a train line that kind of runs, crisscrosses through Sydney, and all the way along those train lines are just these massive high-rise developments going up where people are living in boxes. And there's not enough green space and community space and things like that, in my opinion, being developed alongside that. So, of course, people are on their phones more. Right? We're creating cities that are designed to be disconnected and create loneliness. So why are we blaming this technology? Why are we blaming kids for using the very thing that we gave them because we thought we were parenting well and we have to keep up with the iPhones, as I say, to try and, make it. Then there's all the technology and learning too. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword because, a lot of what kids are using their devices for is supposed to be educational, but obviously it's all in one space. So it's not just the iPhones or the smartphones. It's not just the laptops. It's really the internet connectivity and then what you access by, being able to get online through that syringe device, whatever you want to call it.
So essentially what I hear you saying is there's a crisis, there's a mental health crisis in Australia right now amongst teenagers. Mm-hmm. The rate of suicide is going up, rate of depression is going up. This is not just a statistical anomaly because we're measuring these things more. This is real. Mm-hmm. This is happening.
Absolutely.
And from your perspective, it's more about the world at large that we're living in, the kind of broader societal trends, this kind of existential threat that's around of the world ending and things like that, rather than a complete it's almost like the use of technology and being disconnected is an effect rather than a cause.
Absolutely.
It's a simpler side effect.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's a really complex socio-cultural kind of phenomenon that the world is changing. And yes, phones and technology is a part of that and part of the distraction, and part of the way, I was writing a piece for Medium in relation to Nia's new book, and I'm really fascinated with building traction to goals and building traction and grip and stickiness with things that really matter. And I don't think as kind of, I don't want to say as a society, that's a bit general. I don't think the conversation around your future and designing something that matters and feels purposeful is enough a part of what we do, for instance, in schools. I don't think, even as an adult, I remember I don't really remember anyone ever helping me work out what I wanted to do. There wasn't a lot of guidance around that. There were people who knew and went for it. And then there was me who kind of fluffed around until their mid-20s. And now I'm 41 and I've kind of gone, now I kind of understand all of those steps on my path. And they did kind of come together and make this really cool thing. But at the time, I was just like, I have no idea. And I had no strategy around how to build that traction. I think it would be, and now we're in a much different place, I guess, around the future and the questions that we ask about that. And I think doing more work around building purpose and using positive psychology to kind of build that would help with, some of those issues that are coming up. And I also want to be clear, I'm not saying that there's not problems with young people using technology and some of the issues there, but the way that they're actually sort of represented in the media and certainly some big data sets and how they're spun and how they're selectively sort of cherry-picked to amplify an association between, let's say, social media and depression are not helpful and I guess bamboozling the general public because they don't ask the kind of right questions about the statistics because only the nerdy people like me do. Well,
it's interesting because when you started your work in this space, it was not spoken about. It was not prevalent in the media, in the mainstream media. And now it's interesting to speak with people like you and Nir who were there at the beginning of this kind of, or the earlier days of this kind of like, not anti-tech, but, conscious tech or digital wellness movement. Yeah. And here you say, okay, maybe the pendulum's now swinging in the wrong direction. It's swung too far in the opposite direction. And the mainstream media is just shouting from the mountaintops, tech is bad, tech is bad, tech is bad. It's Facebook's fault. When really it's almost like now scapegoating and ignoring really the broader issues that underlie some of this. Because this dull, I would describe it as almost like a dull vibration of almost helplessness, hopelessness, and depression that I think is permeating young people, including millennials, right? Who are a bit older. I'm 31. I feel it amongst my peers. It's almost this indescribable. It's not sharp. but it's there, you know, and
Yeah,
people are blaming tech.
I think there's all this undermining of our capacity as humans. I think that we sort of do play into the, well, I'm just kind of in the grind, or I'm, it's really hard to kind of effectively sum up, especially because I think sometimes the communities and the populations I'm talking about are relatively rich, white, and privileged, you know, to some level. I guess I don't work with directly in therapy, at least. I used to work at a school where it was opposite a detention centre. So Australia does this really disgusting thing where we put a lot of people into immigration detention centres, and even at the time, women and children into detention centres. And so the schools that I worked at were quite different, but the kinds of things that we worked on and the kind of therapy that I would get to do was very, very different to what I do in my kind of inner West, which is, I don't know what the equivalent would be, kind of middle class. It's, the inner West for us is kind of pretty green and lefty kind of area. Okay. It's like a pretty kind of hip part of town. So the kind of populations that I work with,
I was thinking of the immigration centers you described sound to me.
Oh, no, that's kind prisons. Of the opposite end of town. Yeah, absolutely. They're completely like prisons. Yeah, completely like prisons. And
I'm actually planning on doing a few episodes on prison reform, specifically in the United States, because I think that is just like such a major
We could talk
issue.
For a long time about prisons. I have had cause to, unfortunately, need to visit a friend who is in prison at the moment, and it's just such a weird thing that we do to humans. And I'd never in my life until recently had to kind of come face to face with what that actually looked like, even from the perspective of somebody who's a vegetarian and has been for 40 years, needing to access nutrition was very, very difficult. And what kind of passes off as food in that space is unbelievable. And anyway.
We created, I mean, we still have a subclass. We still have a class of subhumans in America. They're called criminals, and they don't have rights. And they're not, I mean, they don't have the rights of the average citizen. And oftentimes it's because they made a mistake when they were young, or there was some kind of mandatory minimum or 3-strike rule, or they had crack instead of cocaine because they were, you know, and so there's so many, I mean, it's brutal, but I hear you. I mean, I think, you know, when we think about problems like that, and when we think about, you know, like I was just in Dakar in Senegal, and, you know, I look at Africa and the true poverty there, I think there's often this, there can often be a reaction, especially from more liberals and progressives, to throw up their arms and say, well, this digital health thing is not really a problem. Like, what are you talking about? This is like this is not something worth discussing. But I think it is a subset of the broader mental health or you know, communal consciousness or universal psychology or collective unconscious, what Jung would call it, that needs to be addressed, because I think as we kind of pick away at this scab, at these layers, we'll discover more, you know.
Absolutely.
But I hear what you're saying. You're saying I'm working on this digital health stuff with like privileged white people, and
but it's you know, like, especially people who come to therapy with me because they're having problems with it. The people that I want to reach and the people that I attempt to reach with parenting seminars and the student presentations that I do are with, you know, basically every class and cast of people, in the, you know, even the most, and one of, even the low socioeconomic groups in Sydney, for instance, kids will have a phone. Kids will have a smartphone. It might be a hand-me-down and they might not have any data, but they will have a smartphone. Lots of people prioritise having a smartphone over paying their electricity bills because it's so central to how we operate. And I definitely think that whole idea of unplugging is a complete luxury that some people kind of can have, because if you're working in the gig economy, then you need to be able to answer your phone. You need to be able to kind of be responsive to things like that. We just to the north of us is Indonesia. Now, they have some of the highest rates of mobile phone use in the world. And, they're a developing nature.
People.
Yeah, right. Australia's not even, I think we've just hit 25 million. So that's when crazy. You think about the number of people on our doorstep who are constantly using phones, this isn't necessarily, a white person's problem. It's just something that maybe, the focus is on how we kind of shift that, and definitely the unplugging and the detoxing thing, I think is, definitely luxurious. But these are skills that everybody needs. These are skills especially mums need, I think, because it's, the issues with little ones, from 6, 7, 8 months old, kids starting to swipe, kids being kind of, having that information overload and the sensory overload through phones super, super early. I think we need to get in and talk about preschoolers.
You have a 2-year-old.
Yeah, I do.
So
yeah.
And
what am I digital?
Daughter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you, how do you handle it as a parent? Obviously, we know, Steve Jobs didn't let his children near an iPad
no, because he had 17 nannies who could do the iPad work for him, right? So don't even get me started on how, people who create technology don't let their kids on it. They have different lives to most of us. So what do I do with my little one? I was going to be so good at this, but and one of the things is on-demand TV, right? If you remember, I don't know, when I was growing up, there was...
says Netflix. It was one of his first words.
There you go. So when I was growing up, you could pretty much just watch Play School and Sesame Street in the morning and then in the afternoon. And that were the only kids' shows that were on. So you watch TV then, you ran around and you played, and then you watch TV in the afternoon. The issue with the on-demand stuff is these kids become demanding. As soon as they know you can put Dora the Explorer on whenever, it becomes this like, I want Dora. No, I want strawberry shortcake, which was this afternoon. Now, our internet was down. You try and explain to a 2-year-old that the special, things that fly through the air, the invisible things that fly through the air that makes strawberry shortcake talk from mummy's phone to the TV is broken. She's like, well, just put it on. And I'm like, no, you can only watch TV today. She's like, well, I don't want flugels. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. This is what it is. And then we went and did some painting. And I was cooking dinner, and then everything was really quiet. And then I went out and looked at her, and she had painted her entire face.
Oh God, that's amazing.
She was like, "I'm a tiger!" So that's what happens. You either have to get really messy, and hang out and do all those things, or the other stuff. So generally, she doesn't touch my phone. She doesn't get to access my phone. Sometimes we make videos for our friends overseas. And she really loves watching videos of other kids and videos of herself. But she will tell me, Mummy, put your phone down if I am videoing her or doing anything and I'm interrupting our interactions. So she actually really tells me what's going on. We don't really share her publicly. So she has a private Instagram account just for friends and family. But generally she's not like, I don't spam people with my kids. I think there's a lot of issues with parenting and the way that people just represent their kids in ways that maybe is not going to go down so well when, they're going for jobs and things like that later down the track. And I think we need to really consider how we share. I think we are reconsidering how we share. I think definitely since Cambridge Analytica and all of that stuff happened, we have taken a step back.
What happened? What was that?
With Cambridge Analytica and the whole Facebook data.
Yes. I thought you said Kendall Jenner. It was an accent thing.
Sorry. Cambridge Analytica. Course.
But I mean, even if you have a private account on Instagram, right? Like they now have all of those photos of your daughter. Yeah. So
they still have them. I guess I feel like I have some control over them and who views them. And
I
even
love the
that
idea of sharing thing. I haven't heard that before.
Oh, sharing.
But I had so many of people in my community, like they have accounts for their kids. It's all about we're going to share as much as possible, as loud as possible, and
and then when you're trying to make the kid into an influencer, and the kid wearing the clothes and all of that, because maybe mummy failed to be an influencer herself. I don't know. I mean, there's whole different ways of spinning that stuff. You might have heard of I think a woman who wrote from the New York Times or one of those kind of big titles, who the kid Googled herself, or the kid Googled mum and found all the stories that mum had written about her child and about their experiences and about whatever. And the kid was 13 and said, "Mum, get that down. Like, you didn't ask me to do that." And mum was like, "No, this is part of my story." And the kid was like, no, it's my story. And there was a really big thing about that, which was, I think, very sort of started a really bigger conversation around how we represent our children online and what their rights are to have a say over what's posted.
When you're hanging out, well, not hanging out, but working with kids, you know, and what is the youngest age that you work with?
In a clinical setting, I just work with adolescents, and most of the presentations I do are in high school, but I speak to parents of like primary school about tech habits and sort of how to set guidelines.
I'm just curious, like, is there, you know, everything that's cool for the parents is uncool for the kids. So are you finding that there is a growing backlash amongst these adolescents about sharing, or is it so ingrained in them that you're sharing, that, you know, sharing is a part of what we do, that it's normal, and they're just sharing on different platforms because Facebook's not cool, but TikTok is cool?
Totally.
You know it.
Look, I think it depends on the relationship you have with your kid and the way that you've kind of role modeled sharing or not sharing or privacy. So I think there's particular kind of family-based values around that. So, you know, sometimes kids rebel against their parents. Sometimes they do exactly what mum did because that's all they've ever seen, or dad did because that's all they've ever seen. Generally, though, there is a bit of the nature of adolescence is to push back and do the opposite almost. It really depends on the connection that you have with your parent. You know, there's always those parents who are like besties with their kids and really are very, very close.
Yes. I'm the cool mom.
Yeah. And sometimes that works and sometimes that ends in massive tears. I think generally kids are much more likely to try new platforms and different ways of messaging or communicating. Whereas, you know, pretty much once you turn about 35 or 40, I think Douglas Adams says it's 35. Any new technology invented after you're 35 will always feel like it's completely foreign and you have no handle on. And for me, that was kind of like Snapchat. I'm still like, Snap what? I don't, streaks, huh? I mean, I get it, but I just don't, it's not something I engage with. TikTok is like hilarious, but most of what kids are actually, like a lot of kids are seeing TikTok because the TikToks are being played through then Instagram. So they're being captured and then played through Insta. And we know that kids are, you know, between Snap and Insta are still really, they're their central platform. So I think it's just shifts in their digital practices. So we also know that lots of kids have Finsters, so fake Instagram accounts, because...
Yes, I heard about this. What is this phenomenon again?
So, well, basically because, you know, the tides turn and mum is on Pinterest. Pinterest is massive again too. Oh, my God. It's really interesting.
No way,
Pinterest,
really?
What? Is it 2011?
Wow. I thought that was done. No. Yeah.
Pinterest is totally like very big again, especially for marketing.
What are they using it for?
Like marketing and memes and like all the inspo stuff. Lots of brands are like, I get lots of ads on Instagram for people who teach you how to like market through Pinterest and things. My algorithm is obviously really sick at the moment. It's sending me some weird things. But basically, because a lot of parents are now on Instagram, like my dad.
We're on pet algorithm, and it'd be great. It'd be great if you could just like chat with your algorithm. Yeah. You know, how's it going?
It's like I made a meme myself once saying, "Do not feed the algorithms. Just either don't click anything or click absolutely everything, so it confuses the hell out of you." And I even saw something that somebody was suggesting. Each day, it was like a digital wellness bloody thing, and they were like, each day do 5 fake Google searches, like search something that you wouldn't really search in order to confuse Google. I'm like, that's really time consuming, and I don't think I have the mental energy to think about 5 things that I don't want to know about. That was their like thing. Like, are you serious?
it's interesting. I mean, because we haven't really touched on what's happening behind the scenes, right? And how those algorithms are kind of evolving through our personal information to create a unique experience for each of us, and what the implications of that are. I think we really don't understand. I mean, the Great Hack just came out, and I think that brought some awareness, but it was sensationalized, and obviously Cambridge Analytica, as you mentioned earlier, is. Was I persuadable? I don't know. Their demographic of easily convinced individuals in swing districts. I don't know. It's this problem goes so wide. Not problem, but this goes so wide and so deep. There's so much to talk about here. It's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, my work has kind of kept expanding in terms of it's hard to talk about healthy habits unless you're thinking about the bigger picture and perspective about why we need to have those habits anyway, and how so much of it, I guess, is just the media and the marketing machine and capitalism, I guess, that even the way that the media cycles work and the content and virality works, and we blame a lot of young people and women, I guess, for being obsessed with vanity metrics, and we're hiding likes from people so that they're not obsessed with these vanity metrics. But how does media work? Media works because you get traction, you get shares, likes, retweets. Yeah. They're not really interested in the sentiment. They're not really interested if people are saying this is rubbish journalism or this is fake news or, promoting misinformation or disinformation. They're like, sweet, we can charge more for advertising to you, and we're getting more and more information pumping through in order to make our algorithm more and more accurate. And definitely, like, there's again those memes that are like, when you get an ad about something or for something that you've only even thought about, like you haven't even spoken aloud. It's not even like Siri heard you talk about it and then served you the ad. It's like, you didn't tell anyone. And that's happened to me a couple of times, right? And I'm like, am I that obvious? Like, am I that much of a cliche?
I mean, we all must be, and increasingly so, the more information that we feed the machine. Yeah. I think, and I'm hopeful that, I work in the blockchain space, and one of the reasons I do is because I believe that Web3, which is, an internet in which users own and control the rights to their own personal information and need to permission how that information is used and understand in a transparent way, what algorithms are being fed, et cetera. I believe that Web3 will flip the advertising model of media on its head. It's broken in so many ways fundamentally. Facebook and Google capture the vast majority of the value that the advertising creates anyways. And so and now that there's such a concern about privacy, I really do believe that we're in our lifetimes, we're going to see a shift away from an advertising driven attention economy. And I think that will ultimately be what I hope tips the scale towards more healthy habits around technology use.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to understand how it all works in order to hack a healthy habit, I guess. So, the curtain is up in terms of people asking those questions now. And you don't have to be a tech guru to understand a little bit about how algorithms work or a little bit about what privacy and data is and why it's so valuable. And they're things that, kids, when I talk to them and I say, you think that social media is free, you are paying literally with your attention, and you need to value your attention. And that is like a really big lesson for a lot of young people. And I think even their parents, when I talk to them that evening too, that, this is an economy that we're in, and your ability to concentrate is definitely one of those key skills of 21st century learners that we rabbit on about. There's 4, I think: creativity, collaboration, communication, and something else. And then I'm adding concentration. If you can concentrate and you can focus, then you'll get places. And that's what I basically teach kids to do. And I try and do myself. It's But it's that constant,
completely.
you know.
And it's extremely challenging, right? You have deep work, I think, on your bookshelf, and yeah, and you know, it's the constant barrage of attention capturing content that is, again, curated just for us. And I've spoken about it on the show so many times, so I don't want to, you know, beat a dead horse. I guess going back to, you know, your work as a psychologist, right? You are trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. You're also trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I had never heard of ACT.
You'll love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do some more research on that.
So we call it ACT. Just a heads up, it's ACT, not ACT.
ACT. Okay, thank you.
And it's like the third wave. So it's sort of off the back of CBT. So I did do my training, or a little bit of training, 4 years ago at the Beck Institute in Philadelphia with Aaron Beck himself and his daughter Judith. But ACT is like contextual behavior therapy. So we look with that a lot about being able to sit with negative feelings and it not all be about happiness. And kind of one of the godfathers of ACT is a guy called Russ Harris, and he's got a book called The Happiness Trap, which I could grab from up the shelf there as well. There's a lot of mindfulness in that, and being able to sit with and be really present to your emotional state. And we talk a lot with that too about fusion to a particular narrative and being fused to, you know, a particular headspace. It's also about values and being aligned to your values. And that too fits in with some of the work or some of Nia's ideas with building traction, you know, action being at the center, and you can either distract or being in traction to those goals. So when you're more aligned to your values and you know what your value and purpose is, so a lot of kind of pos-psych kind of thinking there, then it's a lot easier to know what to do next and to know how to act and behave. So, yeah. Acceptance and commitment therapy always sounds like, it sounds a bit like marriage counseling or something, acceptance and commitment. Yeah. It's like, are we doing marriage therapy here? What are we doing? But it's not that.
Well, it makes sense now that you break it down. I mean, the acceptance part is super interesting to me because I think, you know, as a yogi, self-proclaimed, I guess I'm more of a yoga practitioner. You know, I think many of us start down this yoga path of like light and love and joy and happiness and wanting to, you know, perceiving kind of the way that a yogi should act in a very specific, narrow way. There's a whole set of shoulds, and Ram Dass calls it the phony holy. And I think as I've moved deeper down this practice, it's really, as you said, that acceptance that when I'm meditating or, you know, feeling certain emotions that I've been using subjective labels for, like sadness bad, anger bad, etc., and trying to, in a way, suppress them or remove them and replace them with this light and love stuff, that also is not in kind of operating in truth. And it's important to really sit with these emotions as more data points in our lives to say, okay, yes, I'm feeling anger. Okay, what's it feel like? Oh, my blood's hot. My face is flush. My jaw is clenched. My stomach is churning. Okay, what's it telling me about this experience?
Exactly.
You know, and how can I learn from that rather than just like shoving it down deep, which I think a lot of, especially kind of like millennial men, when it comes to anger, especially these days, tend to do. I wanted to ask you, you know, I think we're probably coming close to our time, but I wanted to ask you, like, you know, should everyone have a digital wellness coach? You know, like I think that
you can be your own digital wellness coach. You don't. I think the idea that we need an external person coaching us all the time through stuff when we live in such a rich information age is sometimes a bit of the problem. Like I think some of you know, where we get trapped is thinking that somebody else has an answer and we don't honor our own wisdom because we haven't learned how to sit with our wisdom and we haven't learned how to be present to it. And that a little bit is what ACT teaches us, but also a lot of the kind of different yogic philosophies as well. So does everyone need a digital wellness coach, like a personal one, like a personal trainer? Maybe not. Do they need lessons in how to be digitally well and savvy and ask the right questions in general? Absolutely. Do we need education on this? Totally. Just like we need education on, sex ed and how to eat well and how to be in relationships. We need education. Do we all need coaching?
That's a great point. I mean, I'm just thinking about, my experience with CBT and how helpful it was for me to have someone to talk to and work through those things. Sure. And I've always said, like, that I think people that are healthy mentally still should, if they have the opportunity to work with a therapist, I think it's incredible. It's an incredibly Absolutely. Powerful form of self-discovery. Yeah. And, if I think of kind of digital health as another pillar of our health, right? Mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, digital. What is that almost like digital health dojo or gym? Yeah. What is the Gold's Gym of digital health? Like, does it exist yet? Will we have one where you can go and train those muscles, maybe not with a personal trainer because we can't obviously all afford that. Yeah. And insurance won't cover it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a spectrum too, because not all of us will be as vulnerable to some of the things that get into our space around digital. Like, a lot of people it's not an issue for them because they have a different set of skills and ways of viewing the world that it doesn't kind of come up for them. I know that when I get stressed, I distract myself with that, with that space. I know there's particular times where I will go stalking certain people, or not stalking in a creepy way, just look up people and wonder what they're doing with their lives when I've probably got better things to do. So that's kind of just working with like your human nature, which is to want to move away from the painful things or kind of ask silly questions that don't really matter, rather than asking yourself more about what matters and where you want to be in the future, rather than looking back in the past, I guess. So I definitely think more conversations and more collaboration and more being connected to these kinds of ideas is really, really valuable. But even the idea of having a coach to some degree pathologizes where you're at, or it takes away some of the kind of efficacy that you might have in solving your own problems from the get-go.
And yet, I hear you, and yet you're a tutor, you're a psychologist, you work one-on-one with so many people. And I find that is such an important, gift, that one-on-one work. And we're so, especially in the age of blitzscaling and tech, even from an impact standpoint, I feel like I've often gotten myself caught up in I want to make an impact. And yet the year or two that I spent as an SAT tutor and as a yoga instructor, I might have made more of an impact, than any other work that I've done. So I don't know. I just like kind of honor you for that, that work that you're doing. And I would love to see more of that. I think we do need that mentor, that coach, that guide, that tutor, that, like the Glass Bead Game by Herman Hesse, Joseph Necht, like the quintessential one-on-one, the guru-student relationship, right? Like I feel like that could heal us.
Yeah. And there's definitely space for guru, right? I definitely think that there is space for that, but also honoring what I find, I guess, working with parents is and with kids is the incredible wisdom of a community and of a group that maybe doesn't get the voice to be shared. So one of the projects that I'm trying to work on are the many things, I have all of these distractions and they're all very virtuous, but here's one of them that is to create parenting salons. So rather than parenting events being this thing where you go and you sit and you get lectured by some expert who you then think, oh my God, I'm doing it all wrong, and shame and guilt comes up, that we actually create spaces and salons for mums and dads to go and have a nice glass of wine or whatever you might float your boat, and have conversations where first and foremost you're honoured for the knowledge and the things that you are doing and that is working, and then we strike up conversations that build upon that and tap the collective kind of wisdom. Because I think that would be much more inspiring, and that's the kind of thing as me as a parent that I want to go to, So I'm trying to work on things like that. So without scaling things where there's like a digital nutrition, I don't know, webinar or course or principles or whatever that everyone can kind of come to, it really is the philosophy and the theory of, what makes you a good human, and how do we stay, well, I guess my tagline is, how do we stay human in a digital age? What does that even mean? What do you want to have in your life? And to me, that's about really authentically connected. That's about being empathetic. That's about being conscious and being able to feel like you're making choices that are really well informed. So increasingly, my work isn't so much about the digital. It's actually about the humans who are interfacing with the digital. And if you could look up, great name for a podcast.
Thank you.
It would just, that's what makes a difference. And that's where those connections happen. So, it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it's about, changing the view and being more savvy about where you choose for that to fit in your life. So it's like decolonizing tech back out of your life. It's colonized us, and now we're like, no, you must go. And this is how you want to fit. Or I want you to fit in my life.
I love it. What I'm hearing is we need to evolve. Our tech is evolving rapidly, and it's time for us to kind of, maybe biologically we won't, but consciously, I think there's an evolution happening as a reaction to this kind of like rapid proliferation of tech and some of the unintended consequences of it. So, Jocelyn, thank you for coming on the show. This was awesome. I'd love to have you come back again. If I'm ever down in Australia, I'll let you know.
Please drop in.
If you're in LA or the States.
Yeah.
That would be great. And of course, we're here talking on Skype. One of the benefits, of course.
Exactly.
Not throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
No, not at all.
Cool. Well, how can people find you? What's the best way for them to get in touch? I'll leave these links in the show notes as well.
Sure. So digitalnutrition.com.au is me, but also if you can remember jocelynbrewer.com, that's also where you find me. And look, I've written for lots of different places, so you'll find my writing on Quartz, HuffPost, Junkie, which is a really great little new media newsletter in Australia, all over the place. The Family Online Safety Institute just published some of my work. Look up those words, a combination of those words, and you will find me in lots of places scattered all over the internet.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Jocelyn, and have a great night.
Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun ride so far. I just get so excited every time I meet some of these incredible people and just love sharing their stories and ideas with you all. You can learn more about the show at thelookuppodcast.com. That's THE, lookuppodcast.com. You can follow me on social media at Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN, on both Twitter, Instagram, and Medium, and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the show as well, The Lookup Podcast, on Facebook, so check us out. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on the website for more future updates. If there's anything from the show that you want to catch, I've posted that in the show links for you to check out. And if there's any way that I can improve, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. If you have any guest recommendations, please let me know. Other than a couple of individuals who are helping me out in the background, this is a passion project, and I'm always open to feedback and any kind of support. I want to thank Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the sound editing and the intro and outro song that he created. And I want to thank Hello There Collective for their support on my social media. You can check them out at hellotherecollective.com. All right, that's enough for me. I'm sure you're ready to go on to your next activity. Thank you for listening. And please come back again next week for another episode of the Lookup Podcast.